The woman who trained me for the overnight shift at the El Paso Greyhound waited until her hand was on the door to tell me the 3:47 arrival from Juarez does not come from Juarez, and that seat 14 had to be empty before it came. I wrote that down the same way I write bomb threats, broken locks, and missing passengers. Block letters, clean spacing, no emotion. 3:47, not Juarez. Seat 14 empty. Then I capped the pen and started the shift like I had just recorded something ordinary. Her name was Delgado. Patricia Delgado. 11 years on the overnight shift, and she left for Albuquerque the following week without a forwarding number, without extra notes, without anything except a half-empty thermos in the break room cabinet and a paperback under the desk she never finished. She said there was a card under the desk drawer. She said, read it. She said that the way people say things, they have decided to make someone else's problem. Fast, eyes already on her jacket sleeve, done with the conversation before it ended. She was out the door before I understood she was not coming back to explain any of it. You need one fact about me before the rest of this makes sense. I document things instead of obeying them. Give me a warning and I turn it into notes, margins, arrows, cross-references, anything that lets me feel one step outside whatever I should probably just be afraid of. That habit did not protect me in this terminal. It only made me useful to it. The El Paso Greyhound Terminal is not a frightening building in daylight. It is tired, the way a building gets tired after decades of the same job with no renovation worth mentioning. Gray-white tile, with grout lines dark from foot traffic older than I am. Plastic seating the color of old mustard, bolted to aluminum frames, shaped by years of human weight into impressions nobody meant to make permanent. The fluorescent panels run at 2 different color temperatures because they were replaced in sections over the years, and nobody matched the bulbs, so half the terminal glows yellow-white, and the other half glows the specific blue-white of a hospital corridor at 2 a.m. That line between the 2 zones cuts straight across the waiting area floor like something drawn on purpose. And at night, when the building settles into its overnight population, that line is the first thing you notice and the last thing you stop noticing. At night, the building talks. The HVAC cycles with a sound like a long, slow exhale. The pipes knock and settle in the walls. The arrivals monitor above the far end of the seating area hums at a frequency you do not consciously register until the terminal is quiet enough that you realize you have been hearing it for hours. The PA system carries a faint carrier tone even when nothing is broadcasting, a thin whistle, almost pitched, that you can mistake for a distant voice when you are tired enough. I had explanations for all of it my first week. Old building, desert temperature differential, 50-year-old ductwork. I was good at explanations. That was the problem. The job itself is straightforward. Arrive at 11, relieve the evening shift, take the overnight manifest from the clipboard on the attendant desk, and spend the next 7 hours issuing platform passes, logging arrivals, walking the waiting area and bathrooms and service corridor every hour, and carrying the two-way radio in case the driver coordinator needs anything. Master keys on a ring for every non-public door in the building. A clipboard. A green steno notebook that I kept separate from the official log, because I have always believed that anomalies have explanations, and finding them is only a matter of looking carefully enough and writing everything down. El Paso is a border city, and it runs on border city hours. The 11 p.m. arrivals from Ciudad Juarez come through with people carrying things in careful arrangements. Bags balanced a specific way, children held a specific way, paperwork in hands rather than pockets. There is a quality of alertness in a person who has just crossed a major international bridge that is entirely different from the alertness of someone who stepped off a connector from Albuquerque. I recognized it immediately because I grew up 20 minutes from here. The bridge was part of the air I breathed as a kid. I did not think it was my business to interpret what people carried with them when they came through those doors. My job was the manifest, the passes, and the walks. My first 2 nights were procedurally clean. Issued passes, walked the terminal, logged arrivals. The arrivals monitor flickered at 3:44 on night 2 and went solid again at 3:51, and I noted the interval and moved on, still building what I thought was a picture. But I made 2 mistakes that second night that I did not know were mistakes. At 2:15, doing my safety walk, I came through the waiting area and there was a woman in the far row, the row of seats along the north wall beneath the arrivals monitor's left edge. She was already seated when I started the walk. Dark eyes, hands folded over what looked like a transit slip, gray cardigan too warm for the season. I said, "Long night?" Because that is what you say to people in transit waiting areas when the silence has started to get specific. She did not answer. I moved on. When I came back, on the return leg, she was gone. No manifest listing matched her description at that hour. I noted her in the notebook, NM1. The second mistake was smaller and felt even less like one. Around 3 a.m., checking arrivals against the manifest, there was a name near the bottom that appeared on the first scan and was gone on the second. 30 seconds later, I assumed a misread. I wrote the full name in my notebook, circled it, noted, appeared once, gone second scan, possible manifest error, or fatigue, misread. I was thorough. I did not yet understand that thoroughness was the thing being used. Night 3 is when I found the card. I was reaching under the desk for Delgado's unfinished paperback when I pulled the drawer all the way out and saw it. Taped to the underside with yellowed tape over newer tape over what looked like the original tape beneath both, a laminated card, stiff and clouded from multiple relaminations, the text layered and slightly prismatic, like words seen through old ice. Dated 1974 in the bottom right corner. Precise, slightly formal handwriting, the kind that comes from a generation that was taught penmanship as a real discipline. The title read, Overnight Attendant, Standing Operating Notes, 9 Rules. I sat in the attendant chair and read them the way I read technical manuals, looking for the logic underneath, the system the rules were describing. That was still my posture. That was still the mistake. Rule 1. At 1:50 a.m., count the waiting area twice. If the second count is higher, stop issuing platform passes until 2:10 a.m. I had been counting the waiting area, not at 1:50 exactly, not twice, not with any particular system. I wrote in the margin, implement immediately. I did not yet think hard enough about what a higher second count would mean in terms of where the extra people had come from. Rule 2. Do not greet, address, or make eye contact with anyone already seated in the far row after 2 a.m., unless their name appears on that hour's manifest. I stopped reading. NM1, 2:15 a.m. Long night. She had not answered me, but I had spoken first and I had looked directly at her. Her name was not on any manifest. I went back to the notebook and underlined the entry and wrote next to it, Rule 2 violation, Night 2. Rule 3. If anyone asks whether the 347 from Juarez is late, answer, boarding starts when the doors face east. Do not add anything. Rule 4. Keep seat 14 beneath the arrivals monitor empty after 2 a.m. If someone is sleeping there, wake them only if the manifest still lists them departing west. I looked up from the card through the attendant window. Seat 14, slightly set apart from the main seating cluster, directly under the arrivals monitor, was empty at that moment. I drew a box around the seat number in my notebook. I underlined it twice. Rule 5. Do not write down, repeat aloud, or radio any name that appears once on the clipboard and disappears on the second glance. I sat with this one longer than any of the others. In my notebook from the previous night was a name, circled, underlined, rendered in my careful block letters. The rule did not say what happened if you wrote it down. It only said not to, which meant that writing it did something, and whatever that something was, had already been done by a person who was being thorough. I turned back to the page to check my entry, and the ink had sunk deeper than I remembered. Not smeared or altered, just heavier, the way fresh print settles into wet paper, as if the letters had pressed further into the page overnight, the way a track in soft ground keeps sinking after the foot has moved on. When I closed the notebook, I could feel the impression of those letters through the cover like braille. Rule 6. If the sealed basement sounds like an idling engine, Lock the luggage stairwell and finish your walk without running. The luggage stairwell was a gray metal door with a padlock and a handwritten laminate below the official signage reading, "Do not prerapi." The evening attendant who handed off to me on my first night had said the basement was sealed for environmental reasons since 1989. I had assumed asbestos. I was now aware of that door in a different way than I had been before. Rule 7. Do not approach the east platform entrance after dark. Use the side corridor regardless of wait time. I had been following this one by accident since night 1 because the east entrance handle stuck, and taking the side corridor was simply easier. I read Rule 7 and felt a brief, irrational gratitude for bad door hardware. Rule 8. If the radio requests Platform E, answer with the platform number only. Never give your name. Never say copy. Rule 9. When the 347 arrives, step aside and let boarding happen. Do not count who gets on. Do not count who gets off. I set the card down and went back through every notation I had made over 3 nights. 2 confirmed violations. 1 possible third. Several things I could not cleanly resolve. And still, I was constructing explanations. Previous attendance with occupational anxiety, a hazing tradition, a coping document someone had written during a particularly strange stretch of overnight work near a major international crossing. I needed the world to be made of causes, and I was not yet ready to accept that some causes predate the buildings they move through. For the next 3 nights, I stopped treating the card like superstition and started treating it like air traffic control. At 150, I counted twice every night. On the second of those nights, the second count came back higher by 1, and I closed the pass window. A man pounded the glass. "What's the holdup?" "My connection's in 10. I told him system maintenance 20 minutes. He stood there with the specific fury of someone whose schedule has no margin left, and behind him, the waiting area held its count. At 1 above what I could account for, and at 210, the numbers matched again, and I reopened the window and issued his pass and watched him sprint toward the west platform. His bus had pulled away 2 minutes earlier. I heard the air brakes release from the desk. He stood on the empty platform for a long time with his bag at his feet, and when he finally came back inside, he did not look at me, and I did not explain. That brief, ugly consequence, his missed connection, my inability to say a single honest thing about why, was the first time the rules cost someone something real, and it was also the first time I understood they were not abstract. 2 nights after that, on my 3 a.m. walk, I heard an engine idling below the sealed basement door. Not the clean idle of a bus outside. Deeper, muffled by old concrete, endlessly steady the way only something that has been running a very long time sounds steady. The vibration reached the soles of my shoes before the sound reached my ears. I locked the stairwell bolt. I finished the route. I did not run. I spent the rest of that shift at the desk with the keyring still warm in my hand, and I did not go near the stairwell again until daylight, when the door was cold and the lock was exactly as I had left it, and there was nothing behind it except silence and that smell of diesel and old concrete that I had stopped being able to explain away. By the end of that first week, with the card, I had identified 4 people in the terminal I knew not to count, because the waiting area arranged itself around them differently than it arranged itself around everyone else. In overnight transit, you see familiar faces across multiple nights, missed connections, cascading delays, people waiting on things that take days to sort out. That is expected. What is not expected is a person in the same seat at the same time on 4 consecutive nights with no manifest listing, no luggage, no phone, and no interest whatsoever in the arrivals monitor. I turn them into categories because categories do not stare back. NM1, Gray Jacket, South Wall Man. A 4th I logged but never named because naming felt like too much contact. NM1 appeared in the far row 3 nights running after the eye contact incident, and I did not look at her. I looked at the wall above her head. I looked at the monitor positioned above and to her right, which gave me a geometric excuse to let my eyes pass through her vicinity without landing. She was gone by 4 a.m. each time. But on the 4th night, when I passed her row, I noticed she had turned the transit slip in her hand so the text faced outward, and in my peripheral vision, I did not look directly, I kept the geometry. The handwriting on the slip was mine. My block letters, my clean spacing, the name I had written in my notebook on night 2, the ink that had sunk so deep I could feel it through the cover, now held by someone who should not have existed. In penmanship, I recognized the way you recognize your own face in a window you did not expect to be reflective. I kept walking. I did not write that down. I was learning. Gray Jacket sat in the middle of the main cluster every night between 2 and 3. Name patch on the breast pocket. The name unreadable from my angle, which I now think was the point. Once, around 2:30, a child from a traveling family walked past, chasing a rolled coin, and stopped in the aisle beside him and stared the way small children stare at things adults have spent years learning not to see. The child's mother came and lifted the child without looking at Gray Jacket herself, and I understood from how fast she moved that she knew the etiquette of this. She had been in terminals like this one before, or she was simply the kind of person who understood the difference between noticing and addressing and had made her choice. The manifest changed next, and this was the thing I found hardest to absorb, not because it was stranger than the rest, but because a manifest is a printed document with a defined creation process, and I am a person who trusts printed documents. A name spelled Janek at midnight would read Najek at 3. The same letters rearranged, as if someone had lifted them off the page and laid them back down in a different order. A passenger listed westbound at 1 hour would be absent at the next, without disappearing from my memory of having seen the entry. I photographed each shift's copy so I would have something solid to point to, and the photographs showed exactly what the current manifest showed, even when I remembered the previous version differently. The camera was not a record. It was another surface the building could write on. Then, 17 nights in, I found my own name near the bottom of the manifest. Last name, first initial, a departure time of 6:17 a.m., and a destination that was not a city. 3 routing letters I had never seen in any directory I could find. My name stayed on the page through the rest of that shift, and when I checked at 5:50 a.m., it was gone, and the morning version looked completely clean. I did not sleep well that day. The thing that kept waking me was not fear exactly. It was the specific unease of a person who has built their entire sense of security around documentation, discovering that the document can be written on from the other direction too. On the night the 347 arrived, the night everything I had been building toward either held together or did not, I had been in the job 19 days and felt, with the particular overconfidence of someone who has been studying a system they do not fully understand, almost prepared. She arrived around 11:30. A young woman, mid-20s, canvas bag over one shoulder, and a boy on her hip, 3 years old, maybe 4, well past his bedtime, his head heavy on her shoulder, and his fist loosely wrapped around her bag strap. She went directly to seat 14. I know why. It is slightly set apart, directly under the monitor, the most practical seat in the building for a lone traveler watching for an arrival. She settled the boy across her lap, covered him with her jacket, and I tracked her during my early walks the way I track any passenger traveling alone with a young child, because they are the ones most likely to need something before the night is through. By 1 a.m., the boy was fully asleep. By 1:30, she was close. By 1:50, when I ran the double count, she was in the waiting area both times. Solid, present, a real person with a real child in a real seat. It was 1:56. I had 4 minutes before Rule 4 came into effect, and those 4 minutes carried more weight than any interval I have ever measured, because each one was a minute I could still pretend I had time to find a clean answer. There was an entry near the bottom of the manifest I could not fully read. A departure time of 3:55 a.m., one of those routing codes that did not correspond to any city I could identify. I could not determine whether the rule's condition applied to her. Wake them only if the manifest still lists them departing west. She was not listed west. She was listed as something I could not parse. 2 o'clock passed while I was still holding the clipboard, and the 4 minutes I had wasted meant that seat 14 had been occupied 30 seconds past the threshold, and the arrivals monitor above her head flickered once, brief, sharp, in a way that felt less like a malfunction and more like something noting the delay. At 2:03, a man stepped up to the pass window. He did not look stranded or tired the way delayed passengers look. Clean-shaved, unhurried, with a stillness that was not the same as calm. He asked if the 347 from Juarez was running late. He asked it the way a person reads back an order to confirm it, flat, without expectation. Rule 3 came back to me word for word. I said, "Boarding starts when the doors face east." He nodded once, not at me, but at something just past my left shoulder, and walked away before I could decide whether I had just answered a question or checked in with something that had been waiting to be acknowledged. I watched him cross the waiting area and settle into the far row without a sound, and I did not look at his face again. That was when I understood the shift had not gone wrong. I had just walked into it too late. I went to her. I put my hand on her shoulder and said quietly that I needed her to move to a different seat. She came awake the way mothers of young children come awake, immediate and complete, checking the boy first, then me. She did not ask why. She gathered him. He stirred and resettled against her without fully waking. She stood, and I walked with her to the seats near the main entrance and told her the connection was coming soon and this position was better for boarding, which was not entirely untrue. She said in Spanish that she had been waiting since 9. I said in Spanish that her bus was nearly ready. She said her sister was meeting her in Phoenix. I said, "Good Phoenix." She looked at me like she understood the shape of it without needing the details. She put her hand on the boy's back, looked up at the monitor, and nodded once. I was grateful she took the protection and left me my silence. Seat 14 was empty when I turned back to the desk. Somewhere in the waiting area, the 4 fixed seat figures had adjusted, not toward the woman, not toward me, but toward the seat. The quiet attentiveness of people confirming that an arrangement has finally been corrected. Then stillness again, and the hum of the monitor, and the HVAC pulling its long, slow breath through the building. At 3:44, the arrivals monitor flickered. At 3:46, the radio cracked open, and a voice I did not recognize said, "Platform E, confirm attendant on duty." Silence stretched 5 seconds, then static swallowed the PA carrier tone. 3 bursts across 6 seconds, before the breathing emerged underneath, unhurried, measured, the kind of breathing that belongs to something that has never needed to rush because it has never been late for anything in its existence. My thumb found the transmit key. I stopped myself. I breathed once. I pressed the key and said, E. Just the letter. I released. The breathing held for another beat. Then, the static closed over it and the radio went flat and quiet. I set it on the desk and did not touch it again. At 3:47, I heard the bus. Not a bus arriving, not the hiss of air brakes or the diesel pitch drop of a vehicle decelerating through a terminal approach. The sound of a bus already there. An engine at steady idle, deep and unending, rising through the floor of the building before it reached the air, filling the concrete the way water fills old stone. The same frequency I had felt through my shoes outside the luggage stairwell, but present now at ground level throughout the whole structure. And when I looked through the attendant window toward the east platform, it was dark and there was nothing there. The double doors at the far end of the east corridor swung outward, not toward the outside of the building the way the building's geometry required. Outward and oriented east. I know which direction is east. I grew up in this city. Those doors face north. They were facing east, and whatever that required of the building to accomplish, the building had done it without a sound, the way very old places do things they have been doing long enough that the doing no longer requires effort. For 1 second, I had the pull to leave the desk and walk toward those doors, to close the remaining distance, to finally have enough data. Rule 7 stopped me before my weight had fully shifted. I stayed behind the glass. Whatever had opened those doors was not using an entrance I recognized, and I was not the reason it had come. The fixed seat figures stood, one at a time, with the unhurried ease of people who have done this before and know the departure will wait for them. NM1 in her gray cardigan, gray jacket with his unreadable name patch, South Wall Man. The fourth. They moved toward the open doors in a line so calm it made every other kind of urgency feel badly calibrated. I heard the first few steps on tile. Leather sole, soft click, leather sole. And then the sound thinned and dropped away, as if the floor between the waiting area and those east-facing doors belonged to a different kind of space entirely. One that did not return echoes because it had no walls to return them from. 3 manifest listed passengers stood and joined the line. Ticketed people. People who had been sitting in the waiting area all night with their phones in their bags and completely unremarkable reasons for being in a bus terminal at 3 a.m. They walked toward those doors the way you walk toward a gate when your row is called. No hesitation, no visible confusion. One of them had been reading a paperback for the last 2 hours. He put a bookmark in it before he stood. He put the book in his bag. He zipped the bag closed. He walked toward those doors exactly the way a person walks toward a bus they have been waiting for all night. And the doors took him. And that was that. I only know they looked every day when they stood. unremarkable walking to those doors, completely calm as they vanished behind them. That is the part that does not leave me. Not the impossible doors or the floor that stopped recording footsteps. The bookmark, the zipped bag, the complete and absolute composure of 3 people standing up and going somewhere I cannot explain and have stopped trying to. Boarding took 11 minutes by the wall clock. Nobody hurried. I kept my hands flat on the counter so I would not start counting. When the last passenger was through, the doors closed and the engine receded, not stopping but pulling back the way a sound pulls back when its source moves through something rather than away from it. Down through the concrete, down through whatever the old ground under this building has been keeping track of since before the city was here, before the border was here, before any expedition arrived to name the road that was already ancient. The arrivals monitor cleared. The manifest showed clean departures. My name was gone. I did my 4 a.m. walk without incident. 8 people in the waiting area, all of them fully accountable. The young woman near the main entrance had her head back and was sleeping. The boy warm across her lap. Both of them completely real and completely unhurt. At 4:55, a clean Juarez connection pulled into the west platform with full lights and an air brake hiss, and a driver who waved at me through the terminal glass, and the young woman woke and gathered the boy and joined the line for Phoenix without looking back. And I was grateful for every detail of that moment. The bus number on the marquee, the driver's wave, the way the boy rubbed his eyes with both fists, the way children do when they are not quite ready to be awake. I logged the 3:47 in the official incident record as scheduled route, on time, uneventful, which is, I suspect, how it has been logged on every night it has run since someone built this terminal over a stretch of road that was already old when the first Spanish expeditions put a name to it. The Camino Real de Tierra Adentro moved through here for centuries before there was a city or a border, and before any cartography made routes into property. Something used this corridor that did not require permission because it existed before permission was a concept. The terminal did not create the passage. The passage is why the terminal is here. The rules do not explain any of that. They simply describe what needs to happen so that both operations, the one on the manifest and the one that is not, can share a building without the seams showing. I made a choice that night to step aside. I would make it again. I am not at peace with what that means, and I do not think I am supposed to be. The card says step aside and let boarding happen. It does not say what you are stepping aside from, or whether the people who go through arrive anywhere, or whether the fact that they looked so calm on the way out is a mercy, or the cruelest part of it. At 5:58, I heard the day attendant's car in the lot. At 6 a.m., we passed in the doorway. Mid-30s, unhurried, with the specific ease of someone who has worked nights recently and knows how to appreciate the particular quality of morning light after a long shift. We nodded the way you nod when there is nothing useful to say, and both people know it. I was already outside, already breathing the cool desert air, the Franklin Mountains going pale and sharp against a sky just starting to show color, the bridge traffic beginning its slow morning build in the distance. I was 3 steps from the door when I realized I had left the card on the desk. I turned back. He was at the desk. The drawer was pulled all the way out. The laminated card was in his hand, and his face had the expression I must have worn on night 3. That precise, forward-leaning attention. The look of a person who believes that reading something carefully enough is the same as standing outside it. His mouth was moving, working through the 9 rules in order, still at the part where a person thinks the rules are protection. I knocked on the glass. He looked up. I opened my mouth. I could not hear anything. Not his voice, not the PA carrier tone, not the fluorescent hum, not the building at all. Just the engine. That low, unending diesel and old concrete engine idling at the same steady RPM it had idled at since before any of us were born, rising through the floor of the building from somewhere the building does not have room for. It had been running when I arrived on my first night. It had been running when Delgado left. It was running now at 6 in the morning in full desert sunrise, blind to dawn or shift change, blind to whoever pulled the drawer next. I drove north on Mesa toward the mountains. By the time I reached the first traffic light, the terminal was behind me, and when I checked the mirror, its windows had gone white in the early sun, flat and bright and slightly opaque, the way glass goes when the light catches it at exactly the wrong angle and turns it back into a surface instead of a window. For just a second, they looked less like windows than headlights coming through fog. That image is what I carry. Not the rules, not the card, not the east-facing doors or the floor that went quiet mid-stride, or the name printed in a departure field where my name had no business being. Just those white rectangles in the rear-view mirror, and the certainty that somewhere behind that glass, an engine is still running in a space the building does not have room for, has never had room for, and will go on running long after whoever reads this puts the card back under the drawer and starts their first shift and writes their first notation and believes, the way I believed, that writing things down is the same as being in control of them. It was running before the terminal was built. It will be running after they tear it down. At 3:47, nobody living should be in seat 14.